Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayak podcast. My name's Seth Ashworth, and just before we get into an interesting podcast this week, I wanted to give a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. As always, big shout out, thank you to the people who support this podcast on Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform where you can chip in a couple of dollars every month and help this podcast keep running. You also get the benefit of getting to hear it before it's on general release, which sometimes can be many weeks before it comes out and sometimes just a couple. I couldn't do it without them, and if you want to be a part of that community of supporters who keeps the show running, you can go check that out at patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have for this week. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayak podcast. My name is Seth Ashworth, and this week I'm joined with what I would describe as a Whitewater Kayaking OG, Anna Levesque. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Seth. I appreciate you having me.
I would do a horrible job describing your role in paddle sports and your paddle sports career. Would you like to run everyone through your Tinder bio?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I've been paddling for 27 years. Started out working in the kitchen of a rafting company on the Rouge River in Quebec. And from there, fell in love with kayaking and started kayaking all the time. Started raft guiding to support my kayaking habit. Eventually made the Canadian freestyle team. Was on the team for several years. Was a bronze medalist at the 2001 World Freestyle Championships. Had several, top finishes in freestyle kayaking and extreme racing. And then I produced the first instructional DVD for women in Whitewater called GirlsatPlay. And that launched me into several years of empowering women in Whitewater. And that also flourished into so I ran GirlsatPlay for several years, and now I've transitioned it to MindBodyPaddle because approaching paddling and life in a holistic manner has always been important to me, as well as mindset. So I'm also a yoga teacher and a health coach. I teach stand-up paddleboarding as well. So now I would describe what I do as creating empowering experiences that help women cultivate courage and confidence through mind, body, and adventure.
That is I think that would be too long for Tinder, but I think that's a great way to introduce kind of your career. And I would say, to me, I always associate you with GirlsatPlay because I remember seeing that DVD
Sure.
back in the day. And anyway, so you're the perfect person I want to talk to about this. One of the main things that keeps me awake at night, or that my mind wanders to when my mind is wandering, is how to save whitewater kayaking. So I'm concerned that our world, our industry is dying off because of decreasing participation. And I want to talk about how we're going to increase participation. And it seems like your specialty would be how we can increase the participation of female kayakers. What do you think has been effective? What do you notice? Do you agree with my point of view that we're in dire straits? Do you think we're on the up and up? What's your hot take?
Yeah, well, Seth, what you're talking about is not new. So like I said, I've been paddling for 27 years, and I feel like this exact conversation has been replaying, right, every so often throughout the entire time. Whitewater is a niche. It's niche because it is intimidating. And, the reality of it is people are afraid of it because they're afraid of drowning. I mean, let's just cut to the chase. Okay?
I mean, that's logical though, right? You can see how people would think that.
Yeah, for sure. And so coming at it from that perspective, knowing that it is not that perhaps most people, not everyone is adventure minded, right? And so growing a sport that looks intimidating, right, requires us, if we really want to grow it and have more folks join, requires us to meet people where they're at.
Yep.
Okay, so what that requires is allowing people to show up how they are. And I don't feel like Whitewater has always done that to the best of its ability, or like, I don't feel like the whitewater industry meets people where they're at all the time. Okay, there are for sure effective instructors in the industry, but there's also a lot of, in my experience, there's a lot of in certain, in certain realms of the sport, of you have to look a
Don't mince
certain
words
way.
here, Anna. This is not a
No.
podcast.
Well, I was
What?
trying to like segment, like I was trying to find the right word. I wasn't trying. Don't worry, I wasn't
Right.
trying to like
Don't
censor
feel like you have
myself.
to hold back here. Like,
No.
I want your honest opinion, and everyone listening wants to know how we can save whitewater kayaking.
Yeah,
Um,
well, like, the deal is that there's a lot of, in certain segments, you need to look a certain way, you need to act a certain way, because that's what's shown in the media, right? And that's how folks talk, and that's how, if so when someone shows up, there's a culture, in my experience, and I was a raft guide for a long time too, of calling people who are not in your circle, whether it's punters or, making degrading comments, or like making fun of folks who, you know are wearing Protec helmets or whatever.
yep.
You know what I mean? Like, and even though you think you're doing that within your subset group, like, it's pretty obvious. Someone doesn't have to hear your words to know what you're communicating to them. Okay. So you communicate with body language, with like group dynamics. If someone rolls up to a put-in who's new or taking instruction, if we all treated them like, because you know what, they are the people who are going to save the industry, because they are the ones that are going to buy stuff, right?
Yep.
They're going to buy the gear. And so if they don't feel comfortable because the bros and the bras are like being too cool for school, you know what I mean? Then it's not really welcoming, right? Like, why would they continue to invest in that? Investing in their own alienation, essentially. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah, no, I'm picking up where you're coming from. I hadn't considered that was a barrier to entry before, that there was a bra, like parking lot mindset. And I could definitely see how that would be a barrier to entry. Do you think that's a common thing, or do you think that varies by kind of location to location?
I think it's pretty common. I mean, it for sure varies from location to location and group to group, right? I'm not saying that all kayakers are like this by any means, okay? Or that all put-ins and takeouts. It's just something to be aware of. I'm a very self-reflective person, I think, because I like to learn. And I think sometimes it's just good to look at our own behavior and ask ourselves, how are we leaving other people? Meaning, in any of our interactions with others, how are they leaving the interaction? Are they leaving it feeling empowered, or are they leaving it feeling disempowered? Right.
Interesting.
And I think that whitewater kayakers and the whitewater industry in general, whether it's media, boat companies, manufacturers, could do a better job at leaving new or people who are interested in whitewater kayaking more empowered.
Okay.
So of course we love all of the media about pushing the limits. Like, I really do. Like, all of the amazing waterfalls and super cool tricks, like, they're awesome to see and watch. And I think that that's a really important aspect, right, of our sport, of any sport, to see the people who are pushing the limits and the amazing things that they're doing. And, it's also important to balance that with other stuff, right? Like instructional articles and images of people just having fun. You know, like that's what the ski industry does really well. The ski industry isn't just about skiing, right?
Yep.
And skiing the Nar. There's so many photos about families having fun at the ski resort, smiles. I mean, anyone who runs their own business knows, like, there's so many marketing books out there that how to sell your program or your service is not necessarily to have random photos of your service, but to have people smiling doing what you do, you know, or
Yep.
experiencing what you're doing. And so having more of that. And honestly, like I said, I feel like it's an old conversation that keeps coming up. There's nothing new in what I'm saying. And I do feel like we're doing a much better job now in the industry as we did before. I think that for women, especially, the being able to show up just as you are is really important. And if, you know, who are the folks that are going to, that have the cash flow? I mean, I know we're in an unprecedented times right now with COVID-19 and all that. Traditionally, though, who has had like the cash flow to be able to take instruction and buy gear? That's, you know, your middle-aged folks,
Yep. They're
right? Who are
definitely
interested.
the bulk of those people who can invest in Whitewater are in that bracket.
Yeah, for sure. Most of my clients are 40 plus, and I love that. I'm very proud of that. You know, a few, one of my, I think it was a couple of years ago, a fellow professional kayaker who's younger than me that helps me out with some classes. You know, she said, oh, it's just that, you know, the younger women, like, they just think your stuff is so old. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine with me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of having longevity in this industry, being able to make my living in this industry, right? And
which is not not an
welcoming,
easy thing to do in these days.
right? And welcoming folks who have a true interest and passion. That whitewater, you know, for me and my clients, whitewater is a metaphor for life. It's a metaphor. It is like, whitewater kayaking is one of the best activities for cultivating courage of anything on this
That's
planet.
that's something I've definitely seen, like teaching like kids and like young children. It's very interesting to see their personalities change from day one to day 5 once they've been down some easy whitewater and they're suddenly like, oh man, I can do anything. Um,
Sure.
what's so you said that you feel like you've had this conversation on a cyclical basis for your entire kayak career. What do you think has been the outcome, or what have you been saying, or advice you've been taking or trying to take on board in the last cycles of this conversation?
Well, to be honest, what I started doing, so I used to push back a lot. I used to be a lot more judgmental and opinionated about like how I felt about this subject, and felt like I was doing things right and other people were doing things wrong. And I got a lot of criticism actually for what I do from both women and men. Um, and at
Why?
one point, what's that?
Why?
Why? I've been called soft.
Okay.
Um, you know, like, you can't teach that it's okay to cry on the river. That's a big criticism. Like, to me, crying is
Okay.
just like water coming out of your eyes.
Yeah.
Just
I
like
mean,
anything else, it's like you get to choose what it means. To me, it's just someone having a breakdown. And if you actually have skills to assist them through that, they actually come out the other side a lot more empowered, right?
yep, for sure.
So, um, so I've gotten that kind of pushback, you know, especially in the beginning, and also pushback. You know, I've never been a big fan, and this doesn't exist so much in the industry as far as I'm concerned anymore. But back in the early 2000s, in the heyday, it was the same thing as, actually, Beth Roden, a climber, just published an article in Outside Magazine about body image for women, about how she struggled with that because she, as a professional climber, was always asked to take her shirt off and suck in her belly for photos. And that was never asked of her then husband, Tommy Caldwell, who's also a huge climber.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that kind of thing was also happening in the whitewater world. There's that's what I mean, like looking a certain way, right? Using, judging women on how they look, how hot or not hot they are, based on like 20 somethings vision of what's hot kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff is very discouraging for women, on many different levels. Also back in the day, I experienced, sexism and misogyny and all that. Women are judged harsher when they crash. I think that's still happening, than men do. Then men get judged. And so, to answer your question, all of that, right? So I grappled with all of that, and it made me really angry. And then I just started I actually, for a while, was like, I'm not gonna really be involved in like the whitewater industry as far as media and stuff. And I'm gonna focus on what I do well, which is empowering women, right? And what I would tell, I've had conversations with some of the professional paddlers, women paddlers, who didn't necessarily agree with how I do things. And what I said to them is, look, as long as I have clients and women coming to me and they get benefit out of it, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, because that tells me that my approach is valuable. It's not valuable for everyone, and that's fine, right? And so I started focusing on what I do well, and I stopped just pushing back, and I've found I'm much more effective. I've been able to impact a lot more people. And so I think, to answer your question, we each have a unique gift that we can offer. And I think that there should be room for all of those gifts in whatever industry. So in whitewater, for instance. And I think that it's important to not get angry and push back. I think it's important to take your gifts and run with them. And that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, I couldn't really agree with that more. I think when people have a problem, it's really they have a problem, not they have a problem with someone else. It's like it's their problem.
Right. Yeah.
That being said, what are some things that we can do together, both men and women, or whatever gender? What can we all do? Is there anything you could put your finger on to say there is one or two or three or five things we can all do that would help improve participation in whitewater kayaking? Because it's already a small niche, and I am growingly concerned that as like companies get bought out and the things shift, especially in this like in a post COVID-19 world, like I'm very concerned that we're maybe going to have to start making all our own gear again soon, and I don't want to do that. It's like a lot of work.
That would
like,
be
I just
terrible.
want to go kayaking,
Know.
I don't have the skills all the time.
Yeah, I feel you. Okay, one is, let's become aware of our language around whitewater, and inviting others into whitewater. By language, I mean just being aware of how we're talking about it. If you're always telling your biggest, baddest horror stories to everyone, what kind of impact is that having? Again, let's be aware of the impact that our language, that how we're talking about water is having, or talking about whitewater kayaking is having on the rest of the community. Is it inviting, right? If you're talking about the NAR all the time, I'm not saying that you shouldn't tell stories, right? Just become aware of like who you're telling that to and what are you trying to communicate? Because a lot of those stories come from a place of ego, right? Wanting to sound really awesome, wanting to be badass, And like, is that the most important thing? If we really, for those people who quote unquote really want to save whitewater, you being a badass is not going to do it. Right. So
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
one.
It's a collective effort. I don't dispute that.
And then number two would be like encourage instruction.
Yep.
Encourage instruction. I think that there's a mindset still in the whitewater kayaking community that instruction is not valuable. Like, okay, you should be able to learn from your buddies, and then after class 3, you're good to go. If you're a class 4 boater, you have nothing left to learn, and that's just BS, really.
Oh yeah, like
I
I
think
I have had like I don't know if you watch Ben Maher's Instagram channel, but the last few weeks he's been doing all these lives with a bunch
live.
of different people. Just he talks about a lot of PS sometimes, but a lot on just forward paddling, and it is so, like I listen to everyone because he does them in the front of our house, so I know when he's going to do them, and I'm like, okay, who are you talking to? And then he's like, okay, and I'm like, hey, how much is going to be about forward paddling? And if it's more than 10%, I'm like, yeah, I want to listen because like there will be
Yeah,
something you could take away, you know. And I don't no matter how good you are at kayaking, there's always something else you can get better at. So,
absolutely. Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
awesome.
I do think that. Do you think that learning from your buddies and then after you get to a certain point do you think that's just a North American attitude that Europeans don't have because they have like a better, like more entrenched club system, or do you think this is systemic in globally?
Well, I can't speak to that because I'm not as familiar. I will say that it does seem like there is more instruction in Europe, and that's great. I think it's very insidious here in the U.S. and where I live in the southeast of the U.S. especially. Um, and I think that I would love to see more people embrace instruction, and in the beginning, right, building a strong foundation is key. The other thing I would say is and this goes back to like men and women, but I would say to all the men out there, stop trying to teach your girlfriends, wives, like put them in instruction.
I
you
could
know
not agree with you any more. 100%. Like that, I don't really teach work as a kayak instructor anymore. But when I did, there was like that would be one or two people in my class every week. Like, well, my boyfriend tried to teach me to kayaking. I thought I was going to die, and I'm like, you like have to unfix a lot of those mistakes, and it's a lot more work than if
totally.
I just started at like my boyfriend's interested in kayaking and I'm interested in it too, but I want to learn on my own. That it will be a much better place to start from.
For sure. And it's funny that I recommend this because I'm in business because of all those men who are who try to teach their girlfriends and wives too. But I think it's important to just
Oh my goodness, yeah.
stop.
And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that people will like put their kids in a kayak camp like without a second thought about it, but when it comes to
Right.
them going to a class, it's like, oh no way. Whereas if
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like
true.
when I look at if I want to get into a new skill or activity, one of the first things I'll do is like, okay, how can I fast track this with someone who's much better than me?
Right.
Show me how to do it, you know? And the times when I don't,
Absolutely.
the times when I'm just like stubborn or hard headed about something, I usually don't make an inroad into it.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Like I did this kayaking trip in Sumatra before Christmas, and I had a week, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to Bali and like teach myself to surf. I did not make any inroad in teaching myself to surf. It was like this, and looking at myself now, like, why didn't you just like go pay somebody to tell you how to do that? You're out there in the
Right.
ocean like a moron, like swimming around, getting other people's way. Like, but
Yeah.
at the time I couldn't see that, and now that I detach and look at myself and go, obviously you don't know anything about that. Like, you're an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. Hindsight is 2020. Right.
Hindsight is 2020. So we've got be more considerate of your language
Yep.
and encourage instruction, which is something that I encourage highly. Is there anything else you think that we can all do collectively to help increase participation?
Yeah. I would say build community. You
Yes.
know, build community, whether that's online, you know, or offline. Go talk to people you don't know that aren't like that you see at the put in. that maybe aren't in your group, go say hey, at least smile, be friendly. Same thing out on the water. Like, I feel like, one place that's really awesome like that is the Ottawa, for
It
sure.
generally, yes.
Yeah, the Ottawa is just so friendly and people are so stoked to be out there. And that's what makes people want to kayak, is being stoked. And building, and the last thing I would say is less judgment, right? So
Yes.
class fun, again, it's about setting your ego aside. And by the way, I'm not saying that people who are at the top of the sport chasing the class 5 and like, they should do that, because that is their passion and that is their gift. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that other people who are not doing that don't have value and don't add value to the sport. So again, coming back to find the gem in everyone and what they're offering.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think everyone in those top level people would agree that like everyone in the sport, by being in the sport, is valuable, because none of us would be doing it without everyone else, right?
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Yeah, and I'm definitely not saying that those top people have that attitude. It's just an awareness for all of us, right? I actually think that it's not necessarily the top people. It's, in my experience as a competitor, when I was competing, it was always the folks who had something to prove that that were the least friendly and the most judgmental, whereas the people who were at the top and had nothing to prove because they were really following their passion for real and felt confident in their skill were the most friendly.
Yes. Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down here. I want to pivot away, or like kind of not away, but like a side tangent of this questioning.
Sure.
Obviously, majority of kayakers are men. Your whole career is a lot about improving, empowering women and increasing participation by women in kayaking. Is there something that men can do to increase that, or is that something that can only be furthered by other female kayakers?
No, I think that we can all encourage each other. And I think it's having an awareness that, okay, first, before I answer this question, I realize that there's a gender spectrum. I just want to address that. Okay, we're talking in generalities right now about men and women, but there's a big spectrum. Having said that, in general, there are some similarities, okay? And there's some science behind, like, for instance, that women have a different stress response than men because we have different hormones circulating in our bodies, different levels of hormones, okay? And that is something that's really important to be aware of. And what men can do is grow their awareness of these biological, physiological differences that also, because our bodies and minds are connected, they create differences in the mind as well, and how we approach stress. Okay. And even without separating it out by the genders, just remembering that not everyone is like you, and having space to not expect others to be like you or to approach something like you. I think that's the biggest thing, right? That you might think that crying on the river is quote unquote weak or whatever. But that doesn't mean it's the truth, right? We have this idea that what we believe is the truth. Our perspective is just one perspective, and there's 7 billion people on the planet, right? So there are as many perspectives as there are people. And having some empathy and compassion and room to see that that someone that you might be judging as struggling may just have something else going on, right? And what about, just ask them, hey, how's it going? What's going on with you? When you ask them, though, you have to be willing to really listen and be present with them and not keep layering on top your own judgment and your own view of how you think the world should be. If you can be really present with the person and get for real what they're going through, right? Then we can make the sport more welcoming for everyone, regardless of whether you're man, woman, right? Kids, same thing. It's really obvious, right? No one would expect kids. We don't teach kids the same way we teach adults, right? And there's differences also between men and women. And like I said, there are studies that show that our stress responses are different. And more importantly, our society has been set up to treat women a certain way. And even though studies show that there's actually not a baseline difference between actual confidence between men and women, that throughout our lives, women are not, the structures and the feedback loops that we get are different than the feedback loops that men get. And that eventually erodes our confidence over time.
So just to summarize here, tactical changes that more men can make to help increase that female participation base is
listen without putting your own stuff on top.
Yes.
Ask questions without putting your own stuff on top, and be open to that other people's experiences are different than yours.
Excellent. I think that's tactical advice that that I definitely appreciate. I often feel like I don't know always how to approach every single situation and how to welcome more people. Well, I've got a pretty good idea actually, but I think other people listening don't have an idea at all. And I think I personally would just like to improve my ideas and maybe look at them from an external point of view and think about what I can do to be better, to improve, to get more people kind of hyped on Whitewater, because I think it's really awesome. And I would like if more people could share in that, whatever their gender is. But I think that this is really good. We're getting down to some really good distilled tactical information here those people can execute on. And that's the key here, I think. That's the takeaway. Maybe, I don't know how I'll express to people they've got to listen half an hour in to get to the important takeaway, but I guess I'll just have to find out. Hopefully someone can recommend it.
Yeah, well, I think you can tell them.
You can tell them. You're right. You're not wrong. Yeah.
Well,
do you think there's any other good tactical things that we can execute on that can help improve participation and help? I want it to be so that in 5 years' time that you're not in this cycle again where someone else is calling you to do a podcast because they're worried about the future of whitewater kayaking.
Yeah. The biggest execution thing, Seth, is self-awareness. Like, check yourself. Just ask yourself questions. How am I being, right? Am I actually promoting the sport? How is someone on the outside viewing this? Am I being friendly? Is this, the way I'm portraying this, is it actually inviting to someone who's not as adventurous as me? Self-awareness is like the biggest power that you'll ever have, any of us, for doing anything in our lives.
It's interesting you say that. I did another podcast. It's going to come out before this one, but it hasn't come out yet in the time we're recording this. But it's kind of funny to talk about time. Anyway, the last podcast I did before this one was with Ben Mom. We were talking about managing fear, and we talked about self-awareness, but in actually a very similar vein to how we're talking about it right now. And it's interesting that seems to be becoming a theme in some of these podcasts here, although not always using the same exact language, but almost always the same ability to detach and look at what you're doing to get to the outcome you're trying to get to.
That's right. Because most of our suffering as humans comes from us living out of the story that we tell ourselves about what's happening. It's not actually what's happening. So,
okay, last question. This is kind of just a fun one because I know it'll make you giggle. When I interviewed Nuria Newman on the second or third podcast I ever did, she mentioned off the cuff that she thought pink kayaks and all pink gear was cheesy.
yeah.
What do you think about
that? I'm not a big fan of like the all pink stuff personally. But I think it's a personal choice. I actually see a lot more guys with pink boats, to be honest.
Yeah,
these
Dane
days.
rocks it. Dane really rocks pink.
Yeah, I mean, which I think is great. I do agree with, like, at first it was all like pink it and shrink it. That's what still the outdoor industry is doing. Oh, this is a women's boat, or this is a women's whatever. And luckily, I think that more and more women are speaking up, and that's changing. But you know what? I don't have an aversion to it, because I believe, again, in equanimity. Here's my yoga teacher, right? We shouldn't be grasping for the good, and we shouldn't have aversion to the bad, so try and stay in that center place. If people love pink, more power to them.
Yes.
Good on you.
Okay, good. That's kind of all I wanted to say on that one. I don't really have anything else to add to this discussion, and I think people are going to have some good takeaways here for how we can all work together to improve participation. I think you've given some really good viewpoints that I'm really hyped on. Is there anything else you want to add before we close it out?
No, except if anyone's more interested in what I'm doing, you can visit mindbodypaddle.com.
And do you have Instagram or Facebook or any of those things?
Yep. Instagram is Anna C. Levesque, and on Facebook, Anna Levesque. Pretty easy to find.
And does MindBodyPaddle have its own thing, or is that separate, or is it?
It does. I'm more active on my personal page, though. MindBodyPaddle. You can search that as well.
MindBodyPaddle, Anna Levesque on all the platforms. Well, this has been Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. I will see you or you'll hear me in a future recording in a few weeks' time. Peace.